Hello and welcome to this episode of Maltos Tech Space, the series where we briefly discuss some interesting industry concepts and trends. Today I'm delighted to welcome Niamh from IoT Horizon, one of our consortium member companies. Hi there Niamh, good to see you again. Hope you're keeping well.
Hi Chris, nice to see you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So today I thought it would be worth expanding a bit on a couple of points that your CEO, Derek, briefly touched upon when we presented our joint webinar back in January. At that time, the UK was in the grip of the worst of the second wave of COVID. So his comment about sensors and COVID sparked some interest. It might seem like a bit of a jump to connect the functionality of an environmental sensor to COVID. So what's the link?
Yeah, so there's not a direct link. The sensor isn't going to tell you, look, there's COVID in the room, but it can tell you that there is an increased level of CO2. It can tell you that there's increased levels of people, so presence detection. It can tell you that the temperature and the humidity is high, and also particulates in the atmosphere. So it's not telling you, yes, look, there's COVID here, but it's saying there's too many people in that room. Maybe you should think about opening the window. Maybe you should think about turning the aircon on, or even putting the heating on. So it's not going to tell you exactly that there's a link, but it's going to make sure that the people within your building are keeping safe. So COVID is obviously spread via transmission. So it's just making sure that you've got the data and you use that efficiently to look after the people that are within your building.
Okay, so it's not that it's a direct detection, it's more that you can detect a buildup of CO2 as an indicator of poor air circulation.
Yes, exactly. And even with particulates, so particulates are measured in micrograms. I look on my screen to make sure I get the right measurement. So for 1 microgram of PM 2.5, that is associated with an 8% increase in the COVID death rate. So things like monitoring your CO2, your temperature, your humidity and your particulates, and knowing how many people are within your building is just a part of your COVID recovery. It's making sure that you're keeping the people safe within your building.
Yeah, and we all know that COVID can spread through aerosol transmission. That's why we've been unable to meet up indoors for so long.
Yes, and I cannot wait to get back indoors and actually meet up with some clients and see some people. So yeah, it's exactly that. It's making sure you're keeping people safe. So there's standards out there like the Well Building Standard, which is predominantly there to say you should be looking after the efficiencies of your buildings, so making sure you've got things like eco lights and your heating is integrated, but also for making sure that the people that are in the building are safe. So I think it's something like we spend 95% of our time indoors. So you need to make sure that your employees, you're protecting their well-being, and you're making sure that you're doing everything you can to protect them against things like COVID and other viruses that are spread, but like you say, via aerosol transmission. If there isn't adequate ventilation in the room, for example, if your CO2 levels are at 1200 parts per million, for every 50 breaths that I take, I could actually be breathing in Chris's air. So with COVID being spread the way it is, it's really important that you're capturing that data and making sure that the people within your building are not at risk. And you can do this by capturing things like temperature, humidity, CO2 and particulates. It's an early warning sign to say, maybe you should open the window, maybe you should open the door, or maybe we should look at things like air circulation units.
I can imagine those things are here to stay then in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's more important than ever to be making sure that you're monitoring your buildings and your people to make sure that you're keeping everybody safe, because it's not just COVID. There are other viruses out there. There is not just going to be this. There could be other waves. There could be other types of infection, like flu, for instance. When you go into an office environment, somebody gets a cold, then everybody gets a cold. So it's just being able to monitor to make sure that you're keeping your buildings clean. You're monitoring the data to make sure that things like CO2 is not getting too high, and then other things like contact tracing to make sure that you can track that chain of infection.
One of the other things, of course, is that the sensor unit you've designed incorporates lots of other sensing modules too. It's not just CO2. Yeah. Seems like a pretty multifunctional tool. Yeah. So could you give us an example of where it's deployed and what the client is monitoring and how it helps inform their decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So we We are very much in beta, so we're about to take it to that next stage. So we have a pilot site in Scitech Daresbury in Warrington, and the use case there is they had a lab environment, they had lab technicians, and they had a 3D printer. So why they wanted to monitor the environment is that, number one, the machine had to be kept in the right temperature, in the right environment, under warranty terms. So they leased the equipment, and it's an expensive piece of machinery. So they needed to make sure that it was being kept in that, like I say, in that right environment, so that if anything does go wrong, they're able to take it back, and the manufacturer can't say, well, you haven't kept it under the warranty terms, you haven't kept it in the right condition. So they've got the data to prove that if anything was to go wrong, they can say, look, we've kept it. You can see the data, you can see I've kept it at the right temperature, the humidity and CO2, etc. But they also wanted it for the lab technicians. They wanted to make sure that their lab technicians weren't inhaling any of the metal shavings. So because it's a 3D printer and they're printing aluminium, they wanted to make sure there wasn't too much particulates within the atmosphere. They wanted to make sure that when they were putting in that powder, the lab technicians weren't going to be impacted. And then lastly, they also wanted to measure productivity. They wanted to see what that data was actually doing to how their lab technicians behaved and how they operated. So they wanted to see, really, it was very much a pilot site, but very much a learning for everybody involved in terms of the data. And then we're about to install it in a robotic cell in another catapult in the National Composite Centre. So they're going to be looking as well to see how our Empower Sense device behaves in a manufacturing environment. And then we're also working on a couple of use cases, again for Empower Sense, within office environments and smart buildings, where, exactly as I said, people want to be able to monitor their people within the building, and then to also capture some really, really important data. So there's sort of a wide sort of use case there. You've got a lab environment, manufacturing, and smart building, and also some sort of standard office kind of environments as well, Chris.
Okay, so being able to detect and even predict certain events can help the users of these sensors avoid all sorts of issues then, like health, safety, repairs, downtime.
Absolutely, and it's probably our most favourite saying in IoT Horizon: you don't know what you don't measure. Data is so important, and that is exactly what the Empower Sense device is doing. It's telling you, it's alerting you, it's giving you insight into how your offices are, how your rooms are, how your building is, and it's giving you that insight to say, look, your building's healthy, but we're also combating that and making sure our employees are healthy as well.
So as well as industrial use cases, which you've been through, what other areas are you looking at selling your technology into? I can imagine there are all sorts of use cases out there.
Absolutely. We've been in some really interesting conversations, like I said before, manufacturing, industrial and office environments. But we're also thinking places like hotels. So when you're trying to encourage people to come back into your rooms, you need to make sure that the temperature and the environment is kept in a safe condition for them to come back to. Because we're going to have a lot of people, I think, being either worried or just frightened of going back and venturing out again. So places like hotels, cruise ships, places where there's going to be lots of people built up, that's a really important target market for us. And then places like, facilities management companies and companies like that, where they've got to deal with a huge amount of different types of buildings, so offices or meeting rooms and places like that. So yeah, I can see it's going to be a whole host of different use cases, different industries, but it's applicable. It's all about capturing that data to make more informed and more impactful decisions.
Wow, it's amazing. You never think there are so many use cases for a humble sensor.
No, absolutely not. Every day is probably when I'm trying to think of how and where it could be applied. It's where the people are. So anywhere with people, that's going to be your important place to put a sensor.
Well, thanks for telling us all about that, and good luck with all of your ambitions. I hope it goes well.